Get the pre-meeting started, so we'll start off with Meadowlark Park. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I'm going to put up an exhibit here real quick that'll demonstrate the area that we're talking about. And it's the area in pink. Once you see this light up on your screens here. A number of, a couple summers ago, I guess you'd say, we had a couple citizens come forward and suggest that the area in pink here be transformed into some usable space, maybe akin to a park or to a community garden and so on. There were a number of ideas that came forward. We had staff go and reach out to the neighbors in question around the surrounding area there and try to ascertain what it is that the flavor of the neighborhood would be in terms of dealing with this piece of property in a productive way. The upshot of it all was that there was no real clear distinction as to what it is the neighbors would like to see happen with this area, aside from perhaps being out there more on a maintenance basis to mow more frequently and stuff like that. However, upon visiting with the council of the day, the then council suggested that we bring this item up again in the event that the current council would like to see something happen beyond what has been proposed thus far. And so with that, we wanted to put this on your radar to the extent that if council would like to see more discussion in that regard, and again, go out and visit with the neighbors and perhaps try to put together some sort of plan that would deal with this from a capital standpoint, the timing for that would be good right now. On the other hand, if council is satisfied that the direction we've taken so far in terms of looking at it from a maintenance standpoint is appropriate, we're happy to go in that direction. And as a matter of fact, that'd be what we would recommend for this group to consider. So with that, if council would like to see more homework done on this matter, we'd be pleased to do that. Otherwise, if council would be okay with staff's recommendation at this point, we're okay with that too. I've got Mr. Cortez here tonight, who was the person that did go out and visit with the neighbors. We're happy to take whatever direction you'd like to see this evening.
Does anybody want to hear from Mr. Cortez before we make a decision one way or another? Mr. Cortez?
Mr. Mayor, I probably wouldn't have a whole lot to add other than we presented the neighbors. I was at both meetings. We presented the neighbors with essentially three options, and of those three, it was sell the land to developers so they could develop it out, get a few lots out of it, finish the park in some way, shape, or form, and try to find out what their ideas or what the flavor is for what that is, and then to do nothing. The only thing that was kind of a resounding unison was don't sell the property to developer. They didn't want to obstruct their views and stuff like that. When it came to finishing the park, they had a whole plethora of ideas that they would like to see, and they all have different ideas of what the park or what that area means to them. And so they all kind of have different thoughts of what that looks like. But as the memo states, just currently within my department, we have a lot of higher priorities that would probably need to be dealt with on a capital standpoint. So this is one of those things where they asked for some additional maintenance, meaning instead of just getting out there and mowing it maybe once a summer, coming out maybe 2 or 3 times. And that was something I agreed to because that's something we can do with little or no fiscal impact. With that, I take any questions.
Councilman Gamros.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I was kind of, this is a strange looking park. I actually meant to drive past it on my way over to the meeting tonight just to take a look, but didn't have the opportunity. Do you mind explaining kind of what the blue part, is it just kind of a long lane of grass? Is that essentially what it is? Or?
Well, it's actually, it's a few acres there, so it's the green area that you can see there is, that L is all finished, it's grassy, you can, a couple teams could play midget football, on each of the L, if you will. So the additional piece is kind of just an oblong, just kind of a weird piece that's just native vegetation at this point.
Thank you. I saw, taking a look at the notes, that the previous council had floated the idea of, like, food for thought, doing some raised garden beds or something like that, and it said no serious consideration had been made. Does that mean we didn't reach out to them and explore what that might look like, or it was just kind of one of those things that fell by the wayside, or?
No, Mr. Mayor, Councilman, we did reach out to Jamie Purcell with, like, say, the Food for Thought project, and also, her name is escaping me right now, but she also is very much into the food programs within Casper. We reached out to both of those groups, and
Leanne Miller?
there was a little interest, Leanne, yeah. you
Yeah,
got
with
it,
community
emailed it.
greenhouse, yeah.
And they just kind of had other sites that were kind of more on the top of their list. Leanne's looking to spot off of East Second, and Jamie was kind of happy with what they kind of had going on presently. And so I think it wasn't like a heck no, it was more of just like a not right now.
Cool. Just the one last one. Totally understand that, it's a weird area, long list of priorities. I guess I was just curious if there was motivation on the part of the folks living in the neighborhood, if they were able to raise some amount of money or something. Have we ever brokered, some sort of deals with neighborhoods or something where, you raise a certain amount of money and we'll match you a certain percentage and you have some sort of input over what it look, is there any ability for them to have some sort of input or way to help fund for something like that?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Councilman, we have talked about that in different areas along with this area as well. One of the issues is kind of all the neighbors kind of have to like all be in unison, like, yeah, we'll buy up our chunk of the thing and basically make our yard a little bit bigger, what have you. But there are obviously neighbors that really don't want to be part of it. And it's kind of like if one person says no, you kind of kill the whole thing, because then obviously you're looking to another neighbor to pick up that share or box in a neighbor, and anyways, it just gets kind of messy from there. And there wasn't a unison that was like, yeah, well, I'll buy up our portion and do it. And so that kind of got erased at that point, I would say.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cortez. So I guess the two options we have are to do further research on this or just go with staff's recommendation of maintaining it, keeping it maintenance on it. So do we have a flavor either way? Councilmember Pollock.
For me, I'd say we just go with staff recommendation for now until maybe a use or a particular direction is a bit more compelling.
Okay. Everybody good with staff recommendation? Okay.
Very
Thank you.
good, thank you. I
All right.
appreciate that.
We'll move on from there to portable classroom buildings for the fire training facility. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have an opportunity in partnership with our neighbors in Mills to take over ownership of a portable building that they are making available to us to enhance the training facility that our fire department uses. And so I've asked Chief Siplin to come in and visit with you real quick to understand what that's about so that your decision-making later this evening will hopefully be aided and any concerns you might have will be mitigated.
Mr. Mayor, council people. Our current configuration of the training facility located on Metro Road has no facilities used as a classroom. Any formal classroom-based instruction or after-action review of training must be done in an off-site location. During discussions at an Attorney County Fire Chiefs meeting, it was announced that Casper Fire would be looking at the opportunity of possibly filling that need. At the time, Mills Fire Building with power and heat. The second one would be left without power and just used as like search and rescue. I'd note that the contractor is offering this service at an extremely discounted rate. Any ongoing maintenance and upkeep costs can be absorbed in the current CFEMS training budget. And as obviously these donated buildings identify a need at the training and are obviously at considerable cost savings to what it would take for us to build those facilities up there. So our recommendation would be to get them up there. We've looked at them. They're just open. Anybody's been in a portable knows what they look like. They walk in kind of big squares. And for having a space to get out of the weather, those types of things would be really nice for us to have up there. So with that, I take any questions.
Any questions? Okay. Thanks, Chief. Do you need anything further on that, Mr. City Manager? Okay. So we'll move on to the 7th Street vacation. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Pursuant to some conversation that took place following the first reading of this associated ordinance, staff put together some more detail and information as it relates to directions that the council could consider throughout this reading process, if you will, and hopefully give you some opportunity to provide some fuel for your deliberation and discussion, if indeed you do have concerns with what's being recommended. The situation that we are facing is unique in a couple ways. First of all, with regard to the area in question, which is this white void right here on this particular exhibit, is a dedicated right-of-way. And being such, the opportunities that council has to consider with respect to its potential disposal are fairly limited. One of the questions that I wanted to understand real clearly was whether or not this land in question could actually be put out on the open market and bid as we do other pieces of property that the city has and makes available to the private sector from time to time. This is not one of those opportunities to where we can just put out an open market bid to have happen. We are relegated to vacation as being our option for disposing of this property. Now, that does not mean that this vacation cannot entail some level of compensation to the city with respect to this property being disposed of. And so if indeed council has that interest, that certainly would be an option that council could consider with regard to its disposal. The challenge will be for us to be able to set a price that makes sense for this property to be disposed of against. The other thing that's really unique about this property is indeed it is surrounded by a single property owner. As I understand it, the two plats here are owned by the same person that owns these four as well. And so given that this property is surrounded by a single property owner, that property owner will be the recipient of this subject area should the property be disposed of by the city at all. Which means that in that circumstance, the property owner could in fact build up to across these lot lines to the area that is reserved for easement purposes. And that, of course, is an overhead utility easement that many of you have probably seen or understand about the characteristic of this property in question. Unlike the scenario where if we were dealing with four property owners, that the land would be divided up among, which is the most typical scenario that faces cities in questions like this. The property owner basically owns all the property around the area, thereby enabling the usable space here to be developed if in fact topography is not that big of a deal for the developer or the owner in question. And it may not be. So we have options for you to consider, directions you can go, and we tried to elucidate those in the memo that you have in front of you. One of which would be basically to allow the piece of property remain in city hands for the city to maintain into perpetuity, which has been that way basically for the last 100 years, if you will. So not a big change there, but likely would not become a productive piece of property because we will not recommend to you that this property be developed into a street. And so while number 4 suggests that as an option, that is not an option that staff would bring forward.